Sony released their newest entry-level full-frame camera, the Sony A7V, for $2,899 US. After spending 100 days with it, here's what you need to know. When it comes to image quality, the Sony A7V has a 33 megapixel sensor. For photography, it's great for cropping in without losing too much quality. For video, it's 7K quality squeezed down to 4K, so even your 1080p footage will still look sharp and clean. When I shoot talking heads at church, not only is the image quality excellent, but this camera also allows me to preview my footage with LUTs. They're kind of like filters, and I can even burn them in. This way I can spend less time color grading and more time publishing. But here's something you need to be careful of. Because the Sony A7V, it still has a crop at 4K 60, just like the Sony A7 IV. However, you can undo that crop by enabling this new feature called 4K angle of view priority. But high frame rate doesn't stop there. It also shoots in 4K 120 with crop. And you can reduce that crop with the 4K angle of view priority enabled. And if that crop still doesn't bother you, this camera also shoots at 1080p at 240 frames per second for even more slow motion. Even though the Sony A7V is not a video first camera, it sure does have a lot of slow motion options. When it comes to low light, the Sony A7V's dual base ISOs sit at 800 and 8000. When using these exact ISOs, you do have a cleaner image in the shadows. Normally for YouTube videos, I'll film this at ISO 800, but if I'm in place where I can't control the light, I'll use ISO 8000 with an ND filter. So far, this camera has been pretty much a win, but it still doesn't have one big thing: Open Gate. Open Gate is a feature that more cameras are coming out with. It allows you to film in a square, which helps optimize cropping for vertical and horizontal content with a single video clip. So you don't have to think about, is this vertical or is this horizontal? You can use it for both. I personally didn't expect to get it with this camera, but at this price point, you would hope that with all these other cameras in the market, they would pressure Sony into releasing their first camera with Open Gate. More on those cameras later. One addition that will help video shooters is dynamic active stabilization. It finally made its way to the A7V. It's handy, but not in the way that you'd think it would be. While the camera's in-body image stabilization is excellent when it comes to static shots, when it comes to panning or tilting, that's when you start to notice jitters. At least when you use longer focal lengths like 70mm, 105mm, 200mm. So if I plan to do any of those kinds of pans or tilts, I use active stabilization. So if I'm not using a tripod, I'll use dynamic active stabilization just to point at my subject. But if I'm planning to do those pans or tilts, I'll leave it on active stabilization. If you're filming yourself and you want it to look like you have a cameraman following you, this camera also has auto framing mode. It shoots 4K, tracks your face, and crops into the image so that it follows you anywhere in the frame. Not a feature that I use, but it's a nice to have as a solo creator. If this is going to be your first full frame camera, you'll be pleased with the ergonomics out of here. It weighs about 695 grams, has a dual SD card slot, and uses Sony's Z battery. Something new worth raving about is a tilting flip screen. The Sony A7R V is the other camera that has this feature. All the other Sony cameras just have a flip out screen, but with the tilt feature, it's much easier to get lower shots. I prefer the tilt screen for this rather than flipping out and then tilting. Now, what kind of ports did Sony give this camera? Up top, we got the microphone port, and down below, we got the headphone port. I will usually run a Rode Wireless Pro or a DJI Mic 2 straight into the microphone port. This is helpful when I film in church because those two both have 32-bit float, which maintains good audio in case something should go haywire on the soundboard. If you need an XLR input, this does support the Sony XLR handle as well as the XLR K3M adapter. Something else that's unique about this camera is that it has two USB-C ports. One can be used for power and the other for data transfer, like tethering or remote trigger, or as a webcam. And of course, if you want an external monitor, we have a full-size HDMI port. Of all the exciting things about this camera, it's gotta be the photography features. You see, one of these dual SD card slots also accepts CF Express Type A, which is a faster memory card allowing for faster write speeds for all the files that you capture. And because we can write files faster, we can capture images faster. So on the camera, we can burst shoot up to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter. Most cameras can shoot up to 6 to 10 frames per second. And while burst shooting, it's blackout free, meaning the viewfinder doesn't flicker between the frames. so you can stay locked in on the subject the entire time. Now, we can shoot up to 120 frames per second on the Sony A9 Mark III, but that's a $6,000 camera. Now, what if you want to enable burst shooting without having to go to the menu? Fortunately, we can map a custom button to enable burst shooting even when we are in single shooting mode. Handy, right? But the features don't stop there, because we also have what's called pre-capture. If I'm late hitting the shutter by even a second, I can still get that shot. It's surprisingly good. So if I miss somebody's spike in volleyball, if I hit the shutter soon enough, I can get that shot right away. Now, if you're looking for a Sony camera to upgrade to, make sure it has AI autofocus. This camera has it, and when I use it for talking heads at church, no matter which way that the speaker is facing, the camera continues to track their eyes and their face. And even sometimes when the subject is turned around or steps out of frame, it just locks right back onto them. The AI autofocus works pretty well with different subjects as well. I just haven't needed to use them all. Now, here's where I expect things to break. But surprisingly, it has never overheated on me. Not even when shooting 4K 120 frames per second non-stop at room temperature. I normally give a table of how long it takes for the camera to overheat, but I don't have one this time. When shooting 4K HS, my battery lasts about 1 to 2 hours of filming. Is there any other camera worth considering for the same price as the Sony A75? For $2,698, there's the Sony FX2, which is like the Sony A7 IV in many ways, just in a cinema-style body with added video focus features. There is the Sony A7CR, which is a 61 megapixel camera, great for casual shooters who want a smaller form factor without compromising on resolution. And for $3,200 outside the Sony camp, there's the Panasonic S1 II, which has 6K open gate, 70 frames per second burst shooting, and films 4K 120 frames per second with a smaller crop. But if you don't care for 30 FPS burst shooting, 4K 60 uncropped, or even the tilting screen, you can still pick up the Sony A7 IV on sale for less than $2,000. So after 100 days with the Sony A75, was it worth the $2,899? Although many from the Sony Alpha community were underwhelmed with this camera, to me, with its new enhanced photo features and video upgrades, it's still worth the upgrade. But what if you want to get a Sony FX2 instead? Subscribe for that comparison, coming soon.